Yeah.
So you can just start by introducing yourself, your name, your profession, where you come from, and just in general, SUNA EAST residents want to know the aspects.
Yes, okay. Now, my name is Samuel Odongo AMIMO. I'm a resident of SUNA EAST, born in SUNA EAST about 5 decades ago. I schooled in SUNA EAST my primary level. Then I went to Beta High School. That is where I did my O-levels, KCSE, getting out of Beta in 1991. After Beta, I went to Kenyatta University to pursue a degree in environmental planning and management, and graduated in 1997. Yeah, so professionally, I'm an environmentalist. This is something I've practiced since graduating from the university. I come from Godjope ward within SUNA EAST constituency, and my clan is the Great Ramogi clan. You know, there are several clans within this part of the world. Migori County is fairly cosmopolitan. You would call it a melting pot of ethnicities. Yeah, because most of people in Migori actually came from somewhere, mainly central Nyanza, and there are even people from western part of the country, Maragolis. There are quite a number in Migori County. Yeah, so that is basically the brief I can say about my background.
Okay, apart from that now, where have you been working after being an environmentalist?
Yes, I worked, I graduated in 1997. Immediately after that, I was employed by a humanitarian organization. We were running relief support for those places that had issues of democracy, of governance. That was Somalia then, Southern Sudan, there was Rwanda, and northern part of Kenya. We were running relief operations under the umbrella of EcoFlight. I worked there for about 6 years, between 1998 and 2006. I was basically in charge of logistics, processing various relief supplies that were being flown to areas where they were needed, and especially Somalia and Southern Sudan. Yeah, so around 2003, 2004, you remember there were a lot of negotiations that were going on. People were trying to, make these warring parties come to some agreement so that the war could end. And with relief, once there is no hostilities, then they move to another level. So around 2004, there started to be a bit of peaceful coexistence in Somalia, I think, through a lot of intervention from the international community. Southern Sudan were also negotiating peace, and that means that not a lot of support, relief support that we were offering at that time was needed. Yeah, so after that I eased out of this relief organization and started working as a private consultant. So from 2005 to date, I have been a private consultant in environmental and engineering issues. I run a farm that has been in existence for that long. It is in Nairobi, and we work all over the country. Yes.
Like
I want to answer your question. Number one, you asked whether this is the first time I'm joining politics.
Elective.
Yes, elective politics, yes. I've never offered myself before for an elective position, and but I've been looking at how the politicians, the elected politicians, have been treating, or rather performing their functions, and I noted that there's a lot of gap that needs to be filled up, and that is why I'm coming in to try to bridge the gap so that people can be able to get services that they rightly deserve. Yes. What we need to know is that we are today living in a globalized world. In 2015, about 193 countries sat down and looked at what is required to be done to make the world a better place to live in. And you remember at the start of the century, we had Millennium Development Goals. These were about 7 goals which were supposed to take us through the millennium up to 2050. This was about 15 years. Then at the end of that period, the world leaders sat down and looked at the prevailing socio-economic circumstances globally and looked at the global issues and asked themselves why certain things were happening the way they were happening. And if you looked at this meeting of 193 global leaders, they came up with the Sustainable Development Goals. They're about 17. Other than that, even here locally in Kenya, we came up with the Vision 2030. If you look at the two things, they are all taking us to 2030. These issues that we are talking about, that are being talked about in this vision, is how to help people move forward socially and even economically. What am I talking about? When we got independence in 1963, the founding fathers talked about certain aspirations, certain vices that they wanted to fight. And these were 3. There was poverty, ignorance, and disease. 58 years later, I don't know whether we can now stand and say that we have achieved so much in terms of fighting these 3 vices that our founding fathers envisioned at that time. So for me, I want to look at SUNA EAST from that global perspective. Yeah, because I told you that we live in a globalized world where we want to measure with the best in the world. We don't want to measure with the worst. And if we are talking about poverty, in 1963, for example, when Kenya attained its independence, there were big agricultural farms in SUNA EAST. Food security was there. People were farming and they were harvesting and they were taking care of their families. We cannot talk about that today. If you look at the issue of poverty, income, how many people can afford, for example, today in SUNA EAST, to put a meal on the table? There are not so many, because there are people who do not know where their next meal is coming from. Why? Because they do not have the resources to bring that meal to the table. If you look at the issue of health, for example, it is believed that this part of the world is where we have maybe those kind of prevalence of certain diseases like HIV/AIDS, malaria, and so many other waterborne diseases. Are we saying that we are better off today in terms of health care provision than we were in 1963, for example, or after that. Then look at even the electricity connection within SUNA EAST, for example. Is it the level where now it can spur economic development? Look at education. If you look at education, the schools where we went, our primary schools today, they were better in those years when we were in primary school than they are today. So it means there's a problem. Resources have not been harnessed towards education, and therefore schools, the infrastructure, most schools have dilapidated infrastructure. If you look at the classrooms, there are schools where even toilets, pit latrines are not enough for kids. Kids have to queue to go to pit latrine. What does that mean? It affects even the lessoning. Because if, for example, break should be 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and people are still queuing to answer the call, the short and long calls of nature, then it means the lessons will not start as had been planned. Today, we have kids, we have students getting out of universities and coming back to stay with their parents at home. Why? Because they do not even, nobody mentors them. They do not know what they want to do with the education that they have achieved. Today, we have kids or rather students who have gone up to Form 4, they come back home and they sit with their parents. Why? Because they have not been offered opportunity to go, to go for a training so that at least they have skills. Because you see, if you go out there, I work in construction site, when labor is being recruited, they want to know what skills do you have. If you are a mason, if you are a plumber, if you are an electrician, then you'll be hired on the basis of that skill. Most of us students do not have those skills, and nobody's talking about these things. So you end up, you come, you are a fundi, you are a mason, you can build because maybe you learned it by heart, but you do not have a grade. Then you are employed as a handyman, and yet you are doing technical work. You get the point? So it is exploitation. So what we are saying is the gaps that are there are monumental. And we know that these gaps can be bridged. Why? Because we've moved away from the kind of politics that we had in the 70s, the 80s, where siasa mbaya used to be equated with maisha mbaya. Today, as we are talking today, the government of the Republic of Kenya, through the people, promulgated a very progressive constitution that has devolved several functions. We have two levels of government. There are the county and the national government, with various responsibilities, with resources. Are we using these resources? Today, we have members of parliament overseeing funds allocated by the national government, constituency development fund. And this fund is supposed to address certain issues, like maybe infrastructure in schools, security issues, roads, bursaries for those who cannot afford and stuff like that.
So far, you've talked about this CDF? Huh?
Yeah. So I'm just giving you the gaps that are there. So I'm talking about poverty levels, very high. There's food insecurity in SUNA EAST, I can assure you. There is lack of clean water. And when there's no water, when the water is not clean, it means people get infected with these waterborne diseases. When you get infected, for example, because of taking water that is not clean, you end up in hospital where there is no medicine. You are told that you go to a private clinic or private, dispensary, or you go buy drugs from a pharmacy.